It's been a great session. It was a long slog. We made it through it. There was some really great reform, but at the end of the day, what we know is that Oklahoma is a great place to start and run or relocate a business. But fixing workforce and economic development are critical to the growth that we say we all want to have. We want to have this great economy. You have to address the workforce ecosystem, and you have to address the economic development. They go hand in hand. We needed to, when we started looking at modernizing our approach to workforce development, it was very clear from all of our standpoint that you had to also begin to look at how you were going to modernize workforce or economic development, again, because they go hand in hand. This was a really big group approach. About this time last summer, I think we pulled the whole gang together, and we decided and pitched to the governor, hey, will you let us take a look at what is the structure of economic development in this state? And is there a more modern, efficient way to do it? How can we do a better job on delivering on economic development for the state? So we looked at what other states were doing. We retained a consultant and spent a lot of time discussing what's the best way to structure Oklahoma's economic development system. And again, it wouldn't have been possible without the legislative leadership and then, frankly, the economic development expertise that we have up here today. And so what I want to start off with is our legislative champions. And so Senator Thompson and Representative Osburn are going to talk you through what we got accomplished. And then from an economic development standpoint, the on-the-ground experts are going to say how they think that will transpire into better outcomes for Oklahoma. And I don't want to forget, I got to introduce Katie Hankey from the Tulsa Chamber as well, who is a big part of helping make this happen. We'll turn it over to two of you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? This is exciting. This has been a really long journey. As Chad mentioned, we started last summer as a group effort. The Pro Tem actually set the Senate down this path last March with our Select Committee on Economic Development and Business Retention. So throughout the journey of over a year, we have now landed with a complete and signed Senate Bill 1447, which is really going to transform the way the state approaches economic development. So the COMPETE Act, creating Oklahoma's plan for economic transformation and efficiency. We are the building of acronyms, so COMPETE Act for short. What we're doing with this bill is at the top of the Department of Commerce, we now have a CEO. One of the requests of the governor was a very simple modernization of just a title. And so an outward presentation of a CEO, this is your point person for the Department of Commerce in the state. That person has very specific qualifications that we put in place through Senate Bill 1447. We partnered with our economic development professionals to make sure that these were realistic and attainable, but also getting a very high quality economic development focused individual leading this agency. So through 1447, in addition to the qualifications over the CEO, we created two very distinct divisions. Representative Osburn is going to talk about CORE, but Senate Bill 1447 also created the EDGE, Economic Development, Growth, and Expansion. These functions already exist inside the Department of Commerce. So the best thing about this is that there's no new tax dollars associated or going to be expended on this with this version that was signed into law. So what we're doing in the Office of Economic Development, Growth, and Expansion is a very strategic and targeted approach on economic development, growth, and expansion, just like what it says. We are also making sure that not only are we doing targeted industry-specific ventures, things like that, we are really taking a targeted approach of how we're going to retain and support and grow our existing Oklahoma businesses. This is something that's personally very important to me, being a business owner, and we have people who have chosen to be in Oklahoma regardless of the climate, and so we want to make sure that we keep them here. When we were recruiting new businesses, part of how this conversation started, excuse me, is because we had lost out on Panasonic, Tesla, Volkswagen. Why? Why were we losing out on these things? Is this what Oklahoma is meant to do? We're going to find out. The Office of Economic Development, Growth, and Expansion, we're going to have a strategic plan that has to be updated every year and approved by the Legislative Evaluation and Development Committee. This is a committee that is very, very important. Chaired by the Senate Pro Tem and the Speaker of the House. We're going to be reviewing all of these projects that come into the state to make sure that they are viable and that they are in alignment with what the taxpayers of Oklahoma would support. I think that's really probably it for Edge. We can get down into the weeds later. Pretty easy to find if anybody has any questions. So I will turn it over to Representative Osburn.
All right.
And by the way, I just have to brag. I think we make a really, really good team.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming out today. I don't have a whole bunch to add to that, except for to say that when we started out on this journey, we realized that the Department of Commerce actually had not been really statutorily reviewed in 40-plus years, and that reminds me of another bill that I worked on several years ago, the civil service modernization, where, again, we had not looked at how we do hiring and firing and personnel management here in the state for more than 40 years. And so lots of stuff changes during a 40-year period. I know it's hard to believe, but 40 years ago I had hair, and it was delightful. And so that's changed a lot. And over the years, over those 40 years, the Department of Commerce, like almost every other organization, had some mission creep. And I blame a lot of that on the legislature, actually. Over time, we will pass a bill, or we will start a bill, and we're like, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what department to put that in. Oh, here's an idea. Let's put that in commerce. And we did that a lot over the last 40 years. And so they ended up with some mission creep, like I said. House Bill 3252 works in conjunction with Senate Bill 1447 to refocus the Department of Commerce on what it was chartered to do, which is to grow, develop, expand, nurture, and support the Oklahoma economy and Oklahoma business. I was talking to my colleagues in the House, or as I was talking to my colleagues in the House about these two bills, I kept hearing something from several of them, and also other stakeholders out there as well. I kept hearing that every time a new governor comes in, they hit reset on the Department of Commerce because they can. And every governor, I am quite sure, every governor thinks, well, I know how best to do economic development, and that's their right, and I hope they continue to do that, to put their stamp on the Department of Commerce. But what happens is that constant resetting creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates an ineffective organization. So what these two bills do together is help resolve some of that uncertainty as we move on in our history here. We want to make sure that we are solid on what the Department of Commerce does. We've learned a lot from different states, and one thing is for sure, that a focused Department of Commerce focused on what they are supposed to do, grow the economy, grow Oklahoma business, is far more effective. These bills better define in statute what the Department of Commerce does and sets the course for success. I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. So like we mentioned before, you can't do this type of reform without people who actually do economic development, have years of experience in that, and who have the mission of growing their communities and our state. And so we want Christy Gillenwater and Charlene to come up and talk about, from an economic development perspective, kind of what does this legislation do, and where do they see Oklahoma moving in terms of economic development. Christy?
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Chad. I'll tell you, over the past year, this partnership has really been phenomenal. And on behalf of the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber, we just want to say thank you to the partners who stood up, started meeting last summer, really articulating a plan. And appreciate the Oklahoma Business Roundtable helping to bring in a consultant, the State Chamber driving us day in, day out, Tulsa Chamber, Select Oklahoma. We were all in the room together, joined by legislative leaders. And these two tenacious leaders who are with us today, Senator Thompson, Representative Osburn, I mean, you woke up every day with us, talking through language, thinking through what would advance and had the potential for success. So this is a great day. And I look at Mike Jackson on our team who, gosh, during session, constantly kept us abreast of what was happening. Jeff Seymour on our team who wakes up every day leading our economic development efforts. This legislation is extremely exciting. Oklahoma has a phenomenal background in economic development. We've had a lot of wins. You look at the Quality Jobs Act and that program in the 90s. It was really forward-leaning, and that still today is a viable tool for us. But what we really needed was to modernize, as Chad said. We're in a new competitive set, and I can tell you just from Oklahoma City's perspective, we're definitely in a new competitive set today than we were 40 years ago, even 10 years ago. And what it takes to compete at the state level and at the individual city levels is completely different today. And I know Edmond isn't the same as it was 40 years ago, nor is Tulsa. And so this modernization through these two critical bills will enable us to have more clarity. So when businesses who are currently here, which we also, our favorite projects are expansion projects, but whether it's an expansion project or someone we're trying to recruit here, either way, that clarity of process is really important. What's more, projects often last a couple of years. It's regular, standard in economic development that often you'll have 12 to 24 months to maybe even 36 months before a project, says yes to your community or to your state. And so having more consistency of leadership, where you have the leadership at the, leading the state from commerce down, that just makes such a difference in terms of the project leads, the experiences that businesses are having. And candidly, from an economic development ecosystem in the state, relationships are really important in economic development, like in all industries. And so having those relationships, knowing you can trust one another, how to work best with one another to deliver these projects across the finish line is extremely critical. We're also excited about the ongoing discussion around tools. What kind of workforce tools do we need? What kind of economic development, really transactional tools do we need to continue to foster population growth and job growth in our great state? So again, cannot emphasize enough the importance of this legislation. We're excited to be a strong partner with our other economic development friends throughout the state to advance the great state of Oklahoma and bring more jobs to our residents and to our people. So thank you, everyone, for your partnership. This is a big day for Oklahoma. Thank you. Charlene?
I'll welcome Charlene up, but I want to kind of make sure we set the stage. So Charlene is the chair of Select Oklahoma, which is a group of economic developers around the state. And it's really important when you're addressing big issues at the Capitol that you not only look at the urban impact, but the rural impact. How are smaller communities driving economic development, and what are the unique needs they have? And so Charlene was a fantastic partner representing Select Oklahoma, and she wanted to give you that perspective. And I think it's really helpful as we talk about Oklahoma to have the whole perspective, rural and urban. So Charlene.
Thank you all, and good morning. I'm honored to be here today among these top leaders here in Oklahoma and as the chair for Select Oklahoma. Select Oklahoma is the state's professional economic development association. We have over 160 members across the state that represent rural, suburban, urban, and tribal interest. In fact, the majority of our members are professional economic developers. We leverage each other's experiences, expertise, and skills to market, retain, and attract new investment into our state in partnership with the Department of Commerce and the Oklahoma Business Roundtable. You've just heard the collaboration efforts that we've all endeavored this year and our champion legislators who took the initiative and the steps to modernize commerce to make us more competitive. For Select Oklahoma, these bills are a modest victory. We know that there's going to be more work to be done on creating a structure that supports nonpartisan, strong, and consistent leadership across commerce. In fact, I currently serve the rural community of Blackwell. So from a rural perspective, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to economic development. We're all unique, we're all different, we all have different needs. So we depend on the Department of Commerce through their expertise, their programs and services to help push us forward. In fact, over the last 5 years, the Department of Commerce has done a tremendous job in helping push rural Oklahoma forward. One specific example is through the transparency of our portal system. That has allowed rural Oklahoma to compete for projects. In fact, it was previously reported that 52% of the project wins were in rural Oklahoma. So we really appreciate that. Furthermore, to meet the continued demands of our growing economy, we have to be able to support that growing demand and the existing industries. So through the newly structured approach of Edge and Core, that will allow each division to be focused and dedicated to areas of community development as well as economic development for our state. Thank you.
We can open it up for questions, but I also want, as I was listening to Charlene talk, I remember specifically last summer when we were talking about creating the divisions and talking about the need for commerce to be really focused on helping communities get ready for economic development, not just recruiting and retaining companies, but helping community get ready. And I remember Charlene being just an absolute kind of champion of that issue, which is really kind of what beget the core division in the sense of making sure a community is ready so that when an opportunity comes along, they're ready to hit the ground and take that opportunity. And so again, I specifically remember you pointing that out to the group, and it became a big focus of the legislation. So happy to answer any questions from anybody up here. Fire away if you have any.
What is your message to local businesses with this legislation? You know, you're wanting to ensure that we're still incentivizing businesses while we're hoping to get new ones. What's your message there?
I think Senator Thompson can speak to this, and she has been just, I want to say a broken record, but on point, on message on this. And Christy mentioned it too. Sometimes there's a focus politically on the big wins of a new company being here, but Christy pointed out some of their favorite projects, and frankly, some of our best opportunities are retaining and growing companies that are already here. So I don't know if you two want to jump in on that, but I think they could really give some color to that.
We can tag team it. So I like to think of this as this idea that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? We can recruit new and exciting opportunities for the state, but our focus absolutely needs to be what we've already got here. I've had conversations over the last year with so many industry owners, business professionals, and they're like, do you know what it would look like for my business to have XYZ, this amount of support? You know, some of our bigger industries in the state, specific to Panasonic, the question was asked all the time, what would our economy look like if we would have invested $698 million in existing business, right? And so that was really kind of the keystone for me when walking through this process is like, yes, the big things are fun and exciting, but we have to take care of our family here at home first.
Those are great points, Senator Thompson. I would just add, this provides us consistency of leadership. So to really look at our existing businesses, what they need to grow, thrive, and prosper in their markets, and then to come back together and discuss a new tool set. You know, what other tools do we need to make sure we're competitive for our existing companies to grow here? So whether it's additional, again, talent related, whether it's talent recruitment, talent training, you know, those types of tools that will now have a really thoughtful process to dialogue about that, to just, again, the process now to incentivize projects, having consistency there, knowing who we need to approach and how we go about that. You know, those types of steps will also really help enable and facilitate future growth of existing companies in the state of Oklahoma.
I'll point out one other part to that question too that I think is really important. And if you look in the legislation, this team was very specific about a job description for the CEO and then about the development of the strategic plan. And I think one of the key parts, and we talked about this summer, is there are many states that are using much more data to be able to be aware of opportunities or threats, frankly. There's FEC data, there's reporting data, there's publicly filed company data. If you do a better job of using that data, you may get a picture of what's going on at a company that you haven't talked to, but you can get some data that says, hey, they're looking to expand, or their board's pushing them to contract, or what are the things that are going on that's actionable if we're doing a good job of paying attention to that. And I think that's part of the reason why in the legislation, the authors wanted there to be an economic development plan, a strategic plan, and incorporate data in so we know more about the companies that are here and then act on it before it's too late, or act on it when we know that they're looking for an opportunity to expand and we can get in front of them first. And I think that's a pretty big part of the strategic approach that we want Commerce to take. But great question. Yeah, Mark.
I just want to represent the Oklahoma Business Roundtable. We're a 170-member business organization across the state, and I want to thank you for your work for sure. Our membership supports economic development, but the key thing here is it's not cheap. It's hard to do, and the consistent approach that they've talked about is critically important from year to year to year, from administration to administration. And as Chad mentioned, we talked to the governor about that last summer. But funding is also important, and I want to thank the legislature for putting some additional dollars towards telling the story about Oklahoma. And we hear that consistently when we go to conferences and things. We don't hear enough about the good things that are going on in this state. And there are a lot of good things going on in this state. And I appreciate you allocating additional marketing dollars to the Commerce Department to tell the story about the good things happening in our state. And I do believe that this consistency and this new approach and the new legislation will help us put the right leaders in place that will be able to carry this mission forward, and that's critically important. So thank you for that.
Touched on it, you talk about losing Panasonic, but you mentioned recruiting, of course, but retaining. What is your pitch? What do you say to these folks about retaining? Here in Oklahoma, you can accomplish blank or have these opportunities, or
That is a great question, and that is something that is going to be tasked to the new CEO of the Department of Commerce. So one thing that I don't ever want to do as a legislator is get too heavy-handed. That's not really my personality anyway. I like to make sure that we have a structure set up where people can thrive and find the right people to fill those positions. I think it's just a positive work environment, honestly. And so we could talk about this for hours. We could spend a whole day really diving into the language of this legislation and what it looks like. But we have been in contact with the Department of Commerce, and they've been a great partner, helping kind of guide them along so they don't lose the legislative intent as they implement the language of this bill. But strategically addressing all sectors, all of the issues, that is absolutely one of the main intents with this bill.
Do we have, has the new CEO of Commerce been named? Do we have someone?
No. Yeah, the legislation just passed, and I think, and you all can speak to that, I think what we did helped raise interest level in it, for sure, with a really clear direction in terms of what the skill sets that we want this person to have, the CEO title, the restructuring of the Department of Commerce. This job is a lot more attractive than I think it was. So the governor's team is fielding interest, and I know these folks are all helping try to drive some interest in it. But there's not been a CEO selected.
So we know there's going to be special efforts toward getting the major companies to expand into Oklahoma. But what kind of efforts and incentivization will there be to get talented entrepreneurs to begin their companies in Oklahoma?
That's a great. This actually might be more of you. Again, I think this is something that we need to engage our local business community and really ask them what they need. So my husband and I, we're entrepreneurs, we're small business owners. I know what we need, but I don't know what everybody else needs. And so we have got to make sure that we're looking at different industries and that we're reaching out. And that is one thing, honestly, I think through this whole journey of both of these pieces of legislation, the collaboration was something that I actually have never seen in my professional life before. So, I know we had at least 200 stakeholders engaging on this. And I think as far as specific needs, you may be able to speak to that, Christy, but I know in our position, a collaborative, strategic, just in-depth look is really what I think would be most appropriate. But you may know better because your boot's on the ground.
Sure, happy to build on that. Good comments, Senator Thompson. Just building on her comments, a few other things we would lift up is, first of all, it depends on what community in Oklahoma they're located in, depends on what industry sector they're in, how specialized they are. But a few top-of-the-line comments I would make is, first of all, our workforce. The work ethic of Oklahomans is phenomenal, and that is something we definitely market. We also market and help small businesses think about the proximity to other major markets. I mean, we're in the central part of the country, and so that elicits a lot of opportunity. I would also lift up, depending on the target industry, right? Aerospace and aviation, for example, is something we're focused on, the state's focused on, bio, right? The life sciences initiative. Those industry sectors, we do have particular tools that can help them, whether it's, again, specific talent-based support. There is specific legislation that has been, that was approved, I think, a couple of years ago, a tax credit for engineers in certain sectors, right? So how do we continue to look at that and say, okay, would that help further additional sectors if we looked at those kinds of tools? But we've already put a lot of things in place, and a lot of times we find it's just the messaging to companies. Did you know, right? And that's where I know we have a business retention team. Many of you do as well in your states, right? And that's, or in your state and in your communities. And so that's what economic development professionals do. They go out, they build relationships with their existing companies, they find out, to Chad's point, there are great tools and data sets out there, but also continuing to encourage the industry to go out and build those relationships. What do you need? We often hear it is around talent. So it's talent pipeline, all levels of that spectrum. And that's where I think, as we continue to partner with K-12 and higher ed to address some of those needs, how do we, evoke more interest by the business community involving in K-12 and higher ed and providing work-based learning and awareness opportunities? Because again, I would argue pretty much it cuts across the industry sectors. Workforce is a real challenge. And so there's no perfect answer with this because it does depend on the business, but absolutely a lot of our success does come from our small businesses that we help foster. And many of us have a number of partners within our communities who also help facilitate that support, whether it's a small business development center, among others, who can really provide some of that technical support for them as well.
The last point I would put on that is a reminder of Senate Bill 621 and creating the Workforce Commission last year. And so to your point about developing entrepreneurial talent, you can't be entrepreneurial if you don't have the education and the skill set to go be entrepreneurial. And so what Senate Bill 621 did in creating the Workforce Commission is try to streamline this workforce development pipeline, right? K-12, career tech, higher ed, getting aligned, giving kids a clear vision of what they want to go do, and then help them get the skills that they need in order to go be entrepreneurial. And so they go hand in glove. You can't do one without the other. And I'd be remiss if we didn't mention Oklahoma's making great strides in workforce development, and it's just a real complementary effort to that. And I think what we want to see is a 12th grader who knows that they want to be involved in computer science or coding. With the legislation that we all worked on this year, now they have flexibility in their graduation requirements to go spend more time getting those that training while they're in 12th grade and maybe move on to career tech and straight into the field. So getting kids workforce opportunities, experiential learning, internships, externships will lead to that entrepreneur system that we want, and then the jobs hopefully will follow. That's how it's worked. We kind of had a goal a few years ago. We wanted to be Silicon Prairie. Well, you do that with excellent workforce talent, and that's how you build from there.
That's the first time I've ever heard that. Just one quick comment on that. So part of the reason for these bills, House Bill 3252 and Senate Bill 1447, they're just more pieces of this economic development puzzle. There's been like 5 different House bills or Senate bills mentioned here today. All of those things work together and to make this system work. And that's what we have done here. That's what we feel like we have done here. We have added a couple of more pieces to this puzzle. There are still some pieces missing. We're going to continue to work on these as we move forward. But we really feel like we have taken a great step at this point with these 2 bills, getting them across the finish line, getting them signed, and now getting them implemented.